Okay, so thanks for joining us, everybody. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for some people to join in. My name is Bradley Clark. I'm the Director of Technology and Innovation at ATG USA. With us today, we have Buck Davis, who's the co-founder of BIMBOX USA.
And we appreciate y'all for joining. And Happy New Year's to everyone.
So like I said, we'll give it a couple more minutes or a minute or two for people to join in. But today, I'm sure most of you know, we'll be talking about graphics cards. And we'll kind of just run through a variety of topics on them, and then we'll try to save 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the session for people to ask questions. Also, there's an option, I believe, at the bottom of your guys' screen for Q&A. If you have questions throughout the webinar, go ahead and post them in there. And then we can either, depending on what the question is, we can either stop and respond to that question right away, or we can hold it till the end.
And just a quick question. If you're in the chat room and you have a BIMBOX, please type down and let us know what system you have.
Cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started, Buck. So like I said, today we're going to cover graphics cards. And we've kind of been talking about this for the past month or so. But let's kind of run through, let's start off by kind of talking about the differences between, the different uses of graphics cards, whether it's arch-viz or, going through in Navisworks, Revit, or traditional rendering. Kind of talk about that a bit.
Okay, well, I think when we look at this, a lot of times when we talk about graphics cards, we talk about arch-viz products, Inscape, Lumion, Twinmotion. I do want to touch on a couple other non-traditional uses that you might not know. If you use Leica point cloud processing for their Register 360, that leverages your graphics card. If you use Pix4D and several other photogrammetric applications, those will leverage your graphics cards. Having said that, as we kind of dive into this discussion, not every application leverages the graphics card the same, and it really does come down to that software development team as far as how they're going to leverage the graphics or how far they're going to push that optimization. So we'll dive into a little bit of that, but the primary thing that we're going to be talking about today is some arc visualization products, how Revit uses your graphics card, how AutoCAD uses your graphics card. If you are using a different product that we don't talk about today, just type it in the bottom and we're happy to touch on it and kind of give you an overview of how we leverage the card or how that software leverages the card. We got a GoBox MXL. Chris, so you're running a BoxX system. Nothing wrong with that, man. They make great systems. In a past life, I worked for a reseller, and we had box workstations and mobile workstations. So nothing against you. We're happy to tell you that we can help you out when you need your next system, and our system is a shred. So, Brad, do you want to jump into arch-viz products, Navisworks, kind of different programs we're using, or do you want to kind of give everybody a background on you, how you kind of came to BIMBOX, what systems you used beforehand, and then kind of what graphics cards you had on your projects and some of the projects you were working on?
Yeah, so I used to work for Clark Construction. They're top 14 ENRGC in the country. I was a senior VDC manager for them. So I managed everything from out in the Pacific Northwest region. So everything from Seattle down to San Francisco. And while I was there, I worked on a lot of projects, everything from $300 million projects to a couple $1 billion projects. While I was there, I also redid all of their hardware standards for VDC. Also VDC and also their project engineers and engineers, because at the time they were really focusing on having a 3D model on all of their projects across the nation. So while I was there, they started out as an HP shop, really focused on using like the Quadro cards because they were, Autodesk certified. But when I redid the standards, went out, did a ton of different benchmarking on systems, BoxX, Origin, Dell, HP, Lenovo, BIMBOX, and BIMBOX outperformed all of the systems that I ever tested. when I was working with Clark, we went with the RTX 2080 Ti's. And like I said, at the time I was working on $1 billion project. We did a lot of synchro renderings, some renderings in Navisworks. I also did a lot of static renderings in 3ds Max and in Autodesk, or sorry, in Revit. And then I also used Inscape a bit while I was in there. Now I'm using an RTX 3090. It's a little bit overkill for some of the stuff I do, but you know, there's basically nothing it can't do.
Right, right. Well, you know, I think there are two different types, and just I don't know if everybody has the same acumen in this. When we talk about real-time rendering, or we talk about rendering in general, there would be two types. You have post-process and real-time rendering. So a couple of different products we're going to talk about today are arch-viz products, but they leverage different features of that. When we look at true real-time rendering solutions, we're going to be looking at Inscape and Twinmotion. Inscape is a little bit different. You have some different potential outputs and other things, whereas Twinmotion is just what you see on the screen is what you see on the screen. It has a little frame count at the top. If you add more objects, the frames per second might drop, or if you zoom in really far, you might see a change in that as well. So when we look at Twinmotion is what it is. Okay, when you're looking at your screen, that is the output of this product. When we look at Inscape, there are a couple different things. It has a real-time feature. So if you ever used Inscape, you can sync from Revit, you can sync from Vectorworks, you can sync from ArchiCAD. And what you see on your screen in Revit, you're rendering out in Inscape. I think a lot of people, you know, when we travel, Brad, you know, you can make Inscape look photorealistic, but I think when we open up that sample Revit project, you know, the house with the trees and the driveway, all you have to do is hit launch Inscape. And the minute you see that scene with those materials, people kind of have this, whoa, like that didn't, what'd you do? And it's like, well, we're using a game engine to run the same model you have. Having said that, Inscape is one of our favorite products, or one of my favorite products I'll throw out there, because they actually are developing out their software to leverage the hardware that's coming down the pipeline. And we'll touch on some of that in a little bit. But just to go through those kind of three arch-viz products we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking Twinmotion, we're going to be talking Inscape, we're going to be talking Lumion, and they're different. So true real-time rendering is going to be Twinmotion and Inscape, and then post-process rendering is going to be Lumion. And Brad, I used a couple different engines outside of that. Y'all use some Unity and you use some Unreal, which is kind of more similar to a Twinmotion, but gives you the ability to go photorealistic if you're using something like a V-Ray. What kind of drew y'all towards those gaming engines over some of the simpler, you know, Twinmotion?
I mean, a lot of it came down to, you know, the freedom to be able to do a lot of different things. Like when we were at Clark, we were also working on some simulations in Unity and Unreal for safety training, right? So having the ability to go in and do a lot of back-end coding and make it more interactive with things. You know, that's one of the big reasons that we went with Unity and Unreal for a lot of that. It also gives you a lot of freedom to where you can tweak things to make it look the way you actually want it to look. You know, things like in some of the other programs, it's just a little bit harder to do. I'm a little bit more familiar with some of the other engines, so you know that's the route that I went.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a huge fan of Unreal Engine, and if y'all aren't familiar with it, it's an amazing product. Most of the video games you see, and now a lot of the I'd say special effects in Hollywood, are actually using Unreal Engine to make it look photorealistic. The interesting thing, and what I like about that, is Unreal is putting a ton of development dollars. They're buying GIS products. They're buying, you know, they're trying to have this go anywhere in the globe feature where you can kind of travel wherever you want in the world and see the models that have been created and use a really, really high level of finish. The reason that I do like Twinmotion a lot, although it doesn't give me the same level of rendering as an Inscape, is that if whatever you see in Unreal Engine is actually going to move into, Epic, Unreal, when you'll see it in Twinmotion within a year. That's what their development team typically said. So Unreal Engine started leveraging point clouds. A year down the road, you will see point clouds in Twinmotion. So it's a continually developed product that's going to be wonderful. When we look at certain things and getting into some of the graphics cards that we would recommend for these things, Brad, I know I might be getting too far on your list, but it comes down to what graphics card you actually need. That is one of the biggest questions when we talk to clients. What do I need? And a lot of times we get people that want to go balls to the wall and say, I want a 2080 Ti, and you ask them why, and they go, we have budget and we want the best card, right? But we also get a lot of people that say, I use AutoCAD, I use Revit occasionally, and I do some Bluebeam, right? That's one of those systems where you don't need to upgrade your graphics card a lot, right? You will want a nice beat up graphics card because you probably have multi-monitors, maybe 2 or 3 monitors. You will be going into some bigger Revit models, or you might get in some big Civil 3D models. Those programs, AutoCAD, Revit, and Civil 3, don't really leverage your graphics card that much. But if you're working in multiple models or multiple applications on multiple screens, you still need a beefed up graphics card to be able to keep that vector line work moving. And if you're working Navisworks, you definitely need a dedicated graphics card. As far as what upgrade cards you need, at BIMBOX, our base model is going to be a 3060 Ti. That's a virtual reality ready card. You can drop a VR headset on, you can run Inscape, you can run a big model on Inscape. Where we do see people that want to get upgrades, there are a couple different reasons, and I think it primarily comes to what are you trying to do? For arc visualization professionals, I've kind of gotten away from what's 3080 Ti or 3090, whatever your budget will accommodate. If you spend your day in and day out making Lumion drawings, working in Inscape, creating production level output for your company, the better the graphics card you have, the better you'll be in everything. And that's just the easy answer to that. Having said that, do you need a 3090 like Brad? Probably not. The place where we do see, needing these beefed up graphics cards, at least in my experience, is Lumion. So Lumion is a post-process rendering. It's not really real time. You set up your models. It's kind of a little bit laggy when you add a bunch of stuff, and then you go through and you create your, video or whatever it's to record out, all the images you want to record out. When we run into clients that are trying to do high settings, in 4K with 120 frames per second, first of all, I'll get into why you should never do that. But when we get into situations like that, some of these people are looking at 18 to 24 hours of processing, right? And we get people that buy 3070 Ti's and they're like, well, I thought I got a graphics card. You did, right? But it's just you're using the software that doesn't leverage hardware as efficiently as some other programs, right? So I love Lumion. It's very easy to do really, really nice fidelity, environment on there, and get great rendering. But if you have a 5-minute video on ultra settings, you're probably looking at a 24 to 48 hour rendering with a lesser graphic. If you jump to that 3090 in that Lumion workflow, you're going to cut it down by a big number. It still is probably going to be 7 or 8 hours, but you're not looking at a 2-day rendering, because once you do the 2-day rendering, you might have to make a change and then go back and re-render it, right? So the goal in that situation is to get beefed up graphics cards for your post-process rendering. When we look at things like Inscape, there are a couple different situations, and we're working right now to create an Inscape landing page. So we can have an entry-level, mid-level, and expert-level rendering. A lot of times when we look at it, you don't need a ton of RAM unless you're doing specific things, right? So in Inscape, the amount of RAM you have is going to be allocated to your frame buffer. That's how many frames can it have ready for the next, ready to keep rendering as you move around. When we typically look at people that need 3080s or 3090s, these are users that are either working on huge projects or they're working on small, medium projects with a ton of detail, right? It's like, pulls up this house model and he's like, man, the graphics card's getting hammered. And I'm like, well, where all those trees come from? He's like, oh, at Rhino. So they're adding crazy polygon counts to a small scene. And you know what? If you like to do that and you don't want to have to worry and you have budget, upgrade all the way. But there are really some smart ways you can manage your model and keep things in that realm of having a great experience. The other kicker, and we're working to have someone from Inscape on this actual presentation with us, but they weren't able to because they're doing a demo, is 4K images. We get a lot of people that call and say, my model blew up, it's not that big, I'm having a bad experience. And then you start looking at the model and they have 4K images for coffee mugs. They have 4K images for napkins. They have 4K images for everything in their scene. And a 4K image for a small component takes up the same amount of memory as for a wall finishing or something you see. So being able to kind of manage the different inputs in your model can definitely help manage the graphics card side. Brad, I'm going to let you jump in to talk about our next discussion, which is the Quadros versus GeForce cards.
Yes, and before I hop into that, I do want to follow up a little bit and cover something that you we touched on briefly. But the other thing that really hammers your can really hammer your graphics card, besides like Lumion and some of the larger Inscape files, is, like we mentioned, the reality capture processing, right? Like when we get into Pix 4D and things like that, those are ones that actually they will use 100% of your GPU. And you can change some settings in there, but if you have, if you're doing a lot of laser scans or photogrammetry or anything, and you need to be able to process a lot of data, you're going to want to invest in a higher end graphics card, because it will save you a ton of time, and the ROI on it is just going to blow anything. If you're with a 3060 or 3070 and you're doing a couple thousand images of photogrammetry, like take the time and money and invest in a 3080 Ti or a 3090, because it will pay off in the long run. The amount of time that it's going to cut down to go through and register all of those is going to be significant.
And Brad, I know that you called me and said, hey, we got a client that wants, dual liquid cooled 3090s. And all this disrespect, it was like $25,000. Anytime someone calls me and says we're building a $25,000 system, I don't question it, whatever you want to buy, but there are very few instances where that makes a lot of sense, and we try to be mindful of our clients. And this actually happened to be one of those instances I've had where they were crunching, several thousand pictures per day, and really wanted to get all that brought and processed same day. And using that system, they'll be able to accomplish that. So last thing before we move on, Brad, to the Quadro GeForce cards, is I wanted to touch on Inscape. I was talking to them the other day, and there's some new features that they have that are out of the box, leveraging your current 20 series or 30 series NVIDIA card, and then they've added a couple more. So NVIDIA DLSS, deep learning super sampling, is something out of the box that works on the ray tracing cards, the RTX cards. Additionally, they actually have had ray trace sun shadows, which, if you've ever seen an image rendered out of Inscape, you might see a little blurry shadow in the background. And once they released the ray trace for the static images and the panoramas, what that did is sharpen up those shadows a lot. Recently, in 3.2 Inscape's release, they actually are now adding that ray trace sun shadows to the real-time engine. So if you walk up to a plant and the sun's coming this way and you see a shadow, instead of it kind of being noisy and being kind of blurry, you will see a very distinct shadow. All these little things that Inscape does, and this is me going back to why I love their product, are making their product fantastic. And when we think about rendering before the whole real-time rendering came out, it was a V-Ray, right? It was V-Ray, it'd be photorealistic, you had to have a bunch of graphics cards to render out a scene. You had to be a guru in not just your 3D modeling application, but also in V-Ray for post-process rendering and bake maps and all this other stuff. What Inscape has done that we love so much is they have gotten us, it's not 100% photorealistic like V-Ray. It's not. But they can get you to 98% photorealism in real time, and image exports are under 30 seconds. So, the trade-off right there is anyone and their brother that can run Revit can open Inscape and be very effective. If you open up Revit and wanted to use V-Ray for Revit, you would definitely have to take some courses. Brad, I know that you're a general 3D modeler. V-Ray is not an easy program to learn. Am I off base on that?
No, you're spot on. And we've actually I've got a guy who uses V-Ray about every day. And we've had a couple customers who are trying to dabble into it with, 3ds Max and V-Ray, who has hopped on calls with me and other customers to kind of walk them through like some settings to help cut down on it. Because if you use some of the default settings in V-Ray, it can just take forever to go through and try to render anything. So there's a lot of different settings inside V-Ray that you can tweak and adjust to make it look even better than the default settings and take even less time. And we've done that for a couple different customers to get them switched around. And before I get on this, Chris, your question about PowerDirector. So PowerDirector and a lot of the video editors, when you go to process video out, most of them actually utilize your CPU, your processor, instead of your graphics card to push a lot of that out. So you don't necessarily need a big graphics card for doing a lot of video editing and pushing videos out. If you go to PowerDirector's website, you can look at the minimum system requirements, and you can see that the main thing that they talk about is the processor and the processor speed, not necessarily the video card. So that kind of tells you what hardware resources it's actually utilizing to go through and process that stuff out.
So Brad, that would be more of like an Osprey workstation with a 32-core, 64-core processor.
Yeah, I mean, but like I said, it all depends on the size of videos and everything that he's working on, right? Because if it's smaller stuff and it's only 30-second to a minute clips and he's doing it once a month, then I would say save the money, get a Striker 3. Be it overclocked to 5.3, you're still going to get a lot of processing power out of that to be able to crunch those videos out pretty fast. It's just, your money is better invested into a better processor and some RAM than it is the graphics card for that kind of stuff.
So I think that's a great point. And I think that brings us back to kind of what graphics card do you need. A lot of it is what's your expectation on time. Right, so if you don't mind using Lumion and having a 6-hour rendering, set it up before you leave, hit render and come back the next morning, take a look at it, you can make a change, hit render again, and have another chance by the end of the day. If that works with you, or you Lumion once a blue moon, you don't need to jump to a 39, right? In many instances, we have people on the CPU side that do point clouds. They register laser scans. And I always like to ask people what's your ideal turnaround? How many scans a day, and you're okay hitting register before you leave work, and you're fine coming back the next morning and everything registered. You don't need to jump to 64-core Osprey to be able to get that down to 2 or 3 hours. So I think it's a really good point, Brad. I would say that just to give people a spectrum of what we would recommend, I would recommend entry-level model, and that's kind of what our base model is, of a 3060 or 3060 Ti. I would say that that's going to be perfect for Navisworks. That's going to be perfect for Twinmotion. That'll be perfect for Inscape. If you start getting into more highly developed Inscape models or more highly developed Lumion or even Twinmotion models, you might want to jump that up to a 3070 Ti or a 3080. You'll have more RAM, higher clock speeds, you'll have more cores. Everything will be a little better. And then if budget accommodates, go to a 3090. But we'll touch on why not many people have ever needed a 3090. 3090s used to be called Titans. So jumping into the graphics cards things, we've had GeForce card, we've had Titan, which was a specific card that had 24 gigabytes of RAM. It was the kind of ultra high-end gaming card. You had Quadro cards, and you had Teslas. So that was the spectrum of NVIDIA graphics cards, I would say, over the past 6-7 years. They've since changed that. So last year, NVIDIA retired the Quadro line, they retired the Titan line, and they retired the Tesla line. Tesla's always been Quadros for data centers. Quadros have always been the professional workstation card. The challenge that NVIDIA had was you'd have data centers that would call and say, hey, we want some P6000s or P8000s or RTX 8000s, and then we also need to get Teslas, so we need Quadros and Teslas, right? So it was kind of confusing to people. What they've done now is they rolled it up into the Ampere series, so it's the A series. So you can get an A6000, an A5000, an A40, which was what used to be a Tesla, A60 and all your way up. So the new naming convention for Quadros and Teslas makes sense. Their data center clients, they're very big customers, now have a consistent naming convention. They also retired the Titan. So the Titan is now rolled up under the GeForce as a 3090. And from what Brad was talking about, I'll let you drop that knowledge, they're coming out with a 3090 Ti. We've been building workstations for AEC for a long time. Personally, no one, I sold 5 Titans in the first 3 years of my company. We've sold 15 3090s this past year. So I would say NVIDIA had a really good idea, right? Let's just bring it into the 3090s, and then gamers and other people would want the highest end GeForce card, right? So I would say that they're probably selling a lot more 3090s than they ever sold Titan X's and Titan XPs. So just to give you all the kind of lay of the land on that, and Brad, I'll bring it back to you because I know that your company had that big question mark as far as, is a GeForce card a certified Autodesk card, right?
Yes.
You had the IT pushback. Tell me about that.
Okay. One of the probably the biggest misconception in the AEC industry around graphics cards is Autodesk, at least a couple of years ago, they used to have a pop-up that would show up in Revit that when you load it up, if you used a non-certified graphics card, it would pull up a warning, and it will state that your graphics card is not Autodesk certified. Give you this long explanation, basically saying like, we won't support anything if you run into any issues. They don't do that anymore, and they still show a list of cards that are Autodesk that are certified for different programs. But what that actually means is there's a couple things. The first one is that there's an agreement between NVIDIA, AMD, and Autodesk stating that Autodesk will only test and certify professional grade cards for the AEC industry software. But then there's, on the flip side, Autodesk has some other like media and entertainment industry programs that they will still test all of the consumer grade cards for. The certification side of things on that is basically stating that NVIDIA and AMD will not approve the consumer grade cards as being certified for use on the AEC software. It's not that they're not compatible. It's not that they won't work. It's not that they won't work better or worse than the professional grade cards. It's so that NVIDIA and AMD and Autodesk can push those professional grade cards out into the industry instead of relying on the consumer grade cards. And in all of the testing that I have done, if you take the cards that are paired up for one another of the professional grade card versus the consumer grade card, the consumer grade cards always outperform the professional grade cards. I have yet to see the opposite of that. Like if you take an A6000 and you put it against a 3080 Ti or a 3090, the 3080 Ti and the 3090 will outperform the 6000 series cards. It's all just a marketing agreement between those three companies. It's not a lack of performance. It's not compatibility issues. It's that they will only test and certify those cards because NVIDIA and AMD don't want them certifying the consumer grade cards for use, which is really frustrating for a lot of people. And that's what I had to go through at Clark Construction because, at the time they were an HP shop and HP tries to push the Quadro series cards. Well, they were Quadro series at the time that I was doing it. They push those and saying, this is what Autodesk recommends for the AEC industry. And I had a P6000 at the time. I had a $15,000 HP system, and it didn't work any better than the laptop that I had for all of the work that I was trying to do. And I couldn't figure it out why. So finally I did a bunch of digging, and there used to be a white paper that was online that talked about the agreement between NVIDIA, AMD, and Autodesk. And so that's why I finally kicked over and I was like, look, for benchmarking purposes, we are going to test the consumer grade cards and see how they do. Well, it blew all of the professional grade cards out of the water for everything that we tested. So that's how I got Clark Construction to switch over and actually go with the right cards for what we were actually trying to do.
Yeah, right. When we started the company, I mean, it wasn't just certified cards. Autodesk would not let you create a support unless you had a Quadro card or recommended card in your system. So we would actually have to give clients that bought 10 systems the cheapest Quadro card ever. So if something ever went wrong, they can put it in the computer, create the support ticket, and then put the GeForce card back in. So you have to understand, people that we started selling these to, they believed in the product and they saw a performance gain. I think the other thing that we look at now is there haven't been many big releases. NVIDIA and Autodesk don't like share these findings, but you can go right now to NVIDIA, and there are two different drivers for your GeForce cards. There's either the game ready driver or there's a studio driver. The studio driver opens up your GeForce card to a lot of functionality that used to be locked into Quadros. One of the biggest thing, especially if you're trying to get photorealistic, was 30-bit color. So GeForce cards, the studio drivers, which were released about 2 years ago, could only go up to 24-bit color, which is 16.7 million shades of color. And I know that might seem like a lot, but once they got opened up to 30-bit color with the studio drivers, that's over 1 billion shades. And if you try to look at an image rendered 24-bit color versus 30-bit color, it doesn't look anywhere near the same. And this is kind of a big gripe back in the day, Brad, before real-time rendering came out, when we were trying to figure out what cards were. These kind of mom and pop that were doing, really high-res arch-viz work, they weren't like the Genslers, they weren't like the DLRs. So they were forced to actually go out and buy these really high-end graphics cards for $5,000 or $6,000, and they had to get 3 or 4 of them. And that was a big rip for them because they were looking at these Titan XP cards that you could just stack and had 24 gigs of RAM and the same number of cores, but you could buy them for $2,000. So it really boxed a lot of smaller players in the visualization market out because they had to spend $65,000 on a workstation when they could have had the same functionality if Autodesk had not locked those drivers and features to the Quadro cards.
Yep.
Additionally, Brad, I know that you get a lot of questions about OpenGL and virtualization and all this stuff with GeForce cards. You want to touch base on the development drivers and the OpenGL drivers?
Yeah. So the open for the consumer grade cards, they released a developer set of drivers that enables OpenGL to be used over RDP. RDP is the remote desktop protocol. So if you try to remote into your system, if you've ever used a consumer grade card and you notice that it gets really choppy, and you don't have that great of an experience with the remote session, it's not necessarily your internet speed. A lot of it comes down to the fact that OpenGL by default is not enabled on the consumer grade cards to be transferred across RDP. So if you guys run into that issue or anything, there is a set of developer drivers that you can download to enable that. Before we get too far, there's a question for you to answer. It says, do the professional graphics cards have memory error checking that could slow down their performance? And does that matter?
So when we look at a professional card, and this is going back to Brad saying, hey, an A6000 is practically the same thing as a 3090. The difference is it does have the error correcting RAM. It also has a lot more RAM. So 3090 has 24 gigabytes of RAM. A6000, which costs 3 times what the other one costs, comes with 48 gigabytes of RAM. We don't run into a lot of people that need more than 24 gigabytes of RAM in the AEC industry. It's just, if you're talking about a massive Inscape project with 4K images and all the trees from Rhino and everything animated, you probably still wouldn't need more than 24 gigabytes. So when you look at those cards, there's 2 big differences, and I know that it's kind of hard to find these on Autodesk. When you look at a GeForce 3090, it has 3 huge fans, a massive heatsink, and that comes from the fact that as a graphics card runs, like a processor, it gets hot, right? It gets really, really hot. And just like a CPU, if you don't keep a graphics card cool, it slows itself down. These cards won't just melt themselves in your computer. So there comes to this performance of how cool we can keep it and how fast it'll run. Quadro cards typically have a single fan. They have a lower clock speed, and the reason that is they're thinking when they look at their use 3090s, 3080 Ti's, all these cards are going to be running gaming. They're going to be doing really high refresh rates, really high clock rates, but they'll probably do it for a couple hours a day, right? When we look at the Quadro type or the A series, I keep saying Quadro, it's retired. The A series graphics cards, they're expecting these to be rendering for 40 hours a week. They can't have the same clock speed because the card would burn up. So what they do is they dial back the clock speed, they dial back the memory speed, and then they make it to where you can scale them out for whatever you need to do. That's typically not an AEC use case. We use really high performance aftermarket GeForce cards with multiple fans and all the cooling we could possibly get on them. We put case fans that blow cold air across our graphics cards because they run really fast. As long as you keep them cool, they'll run really fast all day long. So that's kind of where we come into that. But you wouldn't find this data chart. If you ever look for a data chart for the specs, go to NVIDIA and look at an A6000. It's not the same specs as if you go look at a 3090. They don't put out the same information because if you put them side by side, people would be buying 3090s and not A6000s, if that makes sense. You have to go to a couple different web pages, and I'll post one of these on this webinar when they finally post it, of where you can go actually look at, wow, 3090 has the exact same number of cores as the A6000. 3090 has a higher clock speed. 3090 has a higher boost clock speed. Memory bandwidth is higher. And when you start looking at that, you're like, well, why is Autodesk trying to get me to spend more money for a lower quality product? So just getting back to that, some people ask us to use Quadros. If calls and says that's all I need, I can't do anything without it. We'll help you out with a Quadro graphics card. We won't recommend it, and the 30-day money back guarantee definitely is not going to be applicable because we're not recommending it. But generally, if you get a system from us, you have a 30-day money back guarantee. It behooves us to make sure you have the right graphics card. Otherwise, the system's coming back, right? So I think that's the big kicker for us is we recommend the best hardware for our clients. It doesn't really come down to a cost thing for us because is the ROI and the consumer experience. It drives productivity. So hopefully that touches on that a little bit, Brad. Do you want to get into the mobile series and kind of the different cards that are available in there, or what do you want to get into next?
Yeah. We can talk about another big misconception on graphics cards is the MaxQ versus non-MaxQ and what that actually means for laptop graphics cards.
Yeah, so this is really tricky. If you get a mobile workstation or you get a Slim or whatnot, and you get a 3070, and then you look at another manufacturer and they also have a 3070, there's gonna be a fine print that says MaxQ. The difference between a 3070 MaxQ and a 3070 mobile is the MaxQ is typically made for battery longevity. If you're ever looking at those 1/4-inch slim laptops that have 3070s in them, those are graphics cards. The reason being is the graphics card has about 50% of the clock rate a mobile graphics card would have. It also has dialed back voltages, it has dialed back all of that, which drops performance. There's no getting around it if you don't give a card power, if you don't give it clock speed and you dial back memory bandwidth. It's not the same thing, right? So at BIMBOX, one of the things we do is we use mobile graphics cards. We have a couple different thoughts on that, right? So a BIMBOX customer isn't the type of customer that wants to take their laptop, unplug it, sit at the coffee shop unplugged for 4 hours. That's not typically our user. Our users are people that can get to the office, plug in their laptop. They want the most performance. They want the most power. They don't want to be crippled. They don't want 50% clock speed, anything, right? They want their computer to work as hard as them. If they go home, they can take a charger or they can buy 2 chargers, keep it home and work, take a laptop home, plug it in, and have wonderful performance. Anytime you're looking at a computer that is going through battery longevity, that's just a different than a professional computer. We expect our clients to work 8 hours a day, if not more. And they want every ounce of performance they can get from that. So that's why we roll mobile processors and not MaxQ. Does that answer your question, Brad?
Perfect.
Good stuff, man. And I tell you, it's funny because we have clients that'll buy three laptops. They'll get an HP, they'll get a MSI, and they'll buy a BIMBOX, and they all have 3070. How is yours performing so much better than the others? It's like, well, I'm guessing they're MaxQ graphics cards. Come to find out, they are. And in a lot of instances, you could even see a mobile 3080 MaxQ underperform, get outperformed by a mobile 3070. So you really want to start looking at whether it's a MaxQ or mobile processor, and if the company you're buying from doesn't tell you, it's probably a MaxQ.
Yeah, especially in those thinner clients, like the super thin, like Razer. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole with a lot of that stuff, but a lot of those thinner laptops that you see that have like a 3080, it's going to be a MaxQ. But the problem that you run into when you put a bigger graphics card or a bigger processor in those really thin chassis is they generate a ton of heat. And I know those Razer laptops are notorious for getting what's called battery bulge. And it's because there's so much heat that's generated by the graphics card and the processor that it actually causes the battery on the backside to swell, which is obviously not a good thing. It's something you don't want to happen to your battery or your laptop, but that's what you run into a lot of times with these smaller clients. And we have enough airflow across the BIMBOX systems for the Slims that we can put the mobile graphics cards in those without worrying about them overheating or causing battery bulge or anything like that.
Well, and I got to throw this out here. My good friend Josh Radel at Inscape, he's one of the customer support techs, or I have client success manager of the Americas. I don't know. He's a great guy. He actually used to work for us at BIMBOX and then got stolen away by Inscape. So he was issued, and I'm not going to name the brand because that's not what we do here. We don't call people out. But he has a razor thin laptop that has like a 3070 in it. And we were out in Boulder doing the Content Crew Roadshow, and he was doing a presentation for someone. And I'm kind of sitting down there because I set up the meeting between him and this architect in Australia. And 30 minutes into his presentation, the laptop started beeping, and he was like, "Oh no!" And it turned off. So what happened was Inscape was taxing his laptop so much, the GPU hooked up, that it couldn't even stay cool. And on the specific laptop that he has, the GPU and the CPUs share the same heat pipes. What that means is when they put heat pipes, if you sit it on top of your GPU, it's copper, you blow air across it, and the idea is it's going to pull that heat outside of your laptop. The issue you run into if you have your GPU and the CPU using the same pipes is your GPU heats up, starts heating your CPU up even more, and when it's in a laptop chassis, there's just not enough airflow to keep them going, so the computer just shuts off. It has to cool down a little bit, and you can turn it back on. That's one of those big instances. We don't offer a 1/4-inch thick laptop. We don't do it, and I know a lot of people ask us why. It comes with cooling. The only way a graphics card runs well, the only way a computer runs well is if it's cool. Right? It's just like your car. If your radiator gets a crack in it, you're not going to drive that far, right? It's gonna stop at some point, seize up, and when that happens, your laptop starts beeping and your presentation comes to a halt. If Josh gets to watch this, remember that. So yeah, and Brad, I guess I'll let you jump into the next topic. I end up.
Yeah, well, we're down to looks like 13 minutes left.
Okay.
So why don't let's see if anybody has some questions that they want to post in the Q&A.
Cool.
And then we can, whether it's questions or if you guys have specific topics you want us to touch on to kind of fill you guys in, we're more than happy to go ahead and post those in the Q&A.
Or if you want to raise your hand, we can probably let you talk.
Yep, we can do that as well.
Well, and the last question is, I guess people that are attending, can you write down what you do? ARC, MEP, GC. I come from the GC world, and I did civil engineering before that. But I want to make sure we have a good understanding of what everyone's doing here.
So Marshall's in architecture. Chris is running Revit as well.
So I would say anyone of BIMBOX, so any BIM applications, I would say that the people that really see a benefit from our systems, obviously arch-viz people, but I would say the number one type of person that really gets to see a benefit of a BIMBOX is people that do production work. If you do production architecture, if you do MEP detailing, fabrication level models, or you link in a ton of different, or just anything complex on your computer, John, LiDAR and survey, that's kind of what we do. In Civil 3D, when you start bringing LiDAR files in, things slow down dramatically, right? I would say that our computers are built for these single core applications that y'all are using. Revit, AutoCAD, Civil 3D, majority of applications in the world only use 1 or 2 cores. So what we've kind of built our company around is getting as fast as possible so that our people using these single core applications have really responsive computers. We use really high performance RAM. Right now we're on the Intel 12900K for our BIM and civil workstations. We use a DDR4000 RAM, which when you're typically using a Dell or HP or another computer is probably like a 2933. So RAM's a lot faster. It gives you a really snappy experience when you're trying to do things. Copy groups up, add LiDAR files, manipulate drainage easements and whatnot. And I would say that anyone that's working continually throughout the day is one of our clients. Additionally, if you do arch-viz stuff, you'll love it as well. If you've ever had a bad experience in a computer, and I'll tell you that's why I started this company. I was working at Valve Construction. I had a Navisworks model on a Disney theme project that I had to get there in the morning and hit open, and it would take 45 minutes to get all the link files linked in before I could run my coordination meeting. It was unacceptable to me. You know, when we started building these systems, I got that 45 minutes down to under a minute. That was saving me a lot of time. If you're working in Revit and you use BIM 360, design to sync models back and forth on your project, that all happens inside of Revit. So that having a fast single core application can cut a sync BIM 360 design from 16 minutes to 4 minutes. You're starting to save 12 minutes every time you sync. If you have 100 people in your firm or 20 people in your firm, that adds up if you sync twice a day, right? So this is what we're talking about. Incremental gains make a big difference when you look over 3 years or even a year or 6 months. Most people in our industry, and Brad experiences, there's never enough time. There's never enough time. Deliverable is always tomorrow. Changes have to be made, before. And one of the reasons that I started this is I was working in InfoWorks with a lot of civil projects, a lot of Navisworks models and real-time rendering. And I would sit at my computer waiting 20 minutes for it to do something. I never could budget, okay, I'll have this to you tomorrow morning, unless I planned on staying at the office till 9 o'clock at night trying to get it done. I'd open a file, it would crash. I'd open something up, my program wouldn't open because I didn't meet the minimum requirements. The goal here at BIMBOX is our base workstation will take care of anything you're doing. You'll have a wonderful experience. You'll get a lot more done. And more than anything, and we always talk about ROIs, it's the user experience. When you sit down and your computer is going almost as fast as you, where you can actually execute, you have a huge difference in your experience every day and how much happy you are working. I know that sounds corny, but if you have a bad computer right now, you know how much time you're wasting. And you know how aggravating it can be to sit there and try to do something like Brad sync. If you don't have enough RAM or you don't have a computer fast enough, every 5 moves you have to hit save because it'll corrupt it. So let's go back to questions before I burn through this.
Yeah, you're good. Okay, so Rich has a question. In a previous meeting, you had mentioned that Revit is working on utilizing GPU and more cores. I'm pretty sure I said that. Any inside news you can share with us Revit users. So I personally don't have any inside news on Revit, but what I will say is that Windows 11 with the new 12th gen processors that will be coming out in a couple months for the strikers, it's a night and day difference in performance. Basically, we've been able to go. I mean, kind of tagging on to Michael's question as well with the Revit benchmark tool. So we've been doing some, Buck, and you can stop me if I'm getting too far ahead of myself. So that we've been doing some testing on the 12th gen Intel processors, and we've found that we've got our scores from about 68 seconds is the fastest we got on the 11th gen down to 56 or 54.
48.
Oh, 48. So there you go. I mean, cutting down about 33% of the speed. And part of that is with Windows and the way that works. And if you guys have more questions, we want to dive into this a little bit more, you can always shoot us an email and we can dive into it a lot. I just want to make sure that I hit everybody's questions. But yes, Windows 11 is a big game changer because the way that it allocates resources to the different programs has changed significantly from Windows 10. And you get a lot more performance out of the programs that you're actually working on and focusing on, and allows you to basically hibernate programs that are running in the background. Michael, yes, we can send out the Revit benchmark tool. It's also up for download, I believe, on the BIMBOX website. You can go to and get that. If you need a previous version, you can always shoot me an email. In fact, I'll just throw my email address down here. If you need a previous version, I can always get you one of the previous versions of the Revit benchmark tool.
Doug, real quick, the AGSoft Metashape, if you want to ping me afterwards, I'm well versed with that. We have a couple clients that's all they do. So if you're interested in catching up afterwards, my email is buck@bimboxusa.com, buck@bimboxusa.com. So happy to jump into that. And
yep. Let's hit Nicole real quick. So Nicole, you're doing a lot of mixed media design. So you're using Photoshop, DaVinci as well. So a lot of those are all focused on the processor for the most part. A lot of the work that it's going to be doing. So you do want something that has a higher core count and a higher clock speed on the processor. I wouldn't spend a ton of money on like a 3080 Ti or a 3090 for the work that you're doing. If anything, focus on getting like an i9 processor, preferably that's overclocked. Get plenty of RAM. I don't know what size of projects you're working on, but there are times in Photoshop that you need a lot of RAM. So I would look at potentially going to 64 gigabytes of RAM for that. Same with simulations in 3D spaces. So my undergrad was in 3D modeling, animations, and simulations. So one of the big things that I would always focus on my builds is one, having plenty of RAM. I don't think you need to go to 128 for most things. I have yet to have a system that has 128 gigs of RAM, and I've worked on massive projects. And then a high clock speed processor. Chris, okay. So for when we talked about those 12th gen processors, the one thing about the 12th gens is they have not shown a release date for the mobile processors yet. These are all desktop processors. So we don't even have a timeline for when the 12th gen processors will be coming out for laptops. So stay tuned for laptops and how soon those level of processors are actually going to be coming out to where we can start leveraging those with Windows 11. Inside, where do we? Oh man, Apple M1.
so I'll touch on this, and I think this is going back to what Intel's doing with Microsoft. Apple, my wife has the one with an M1 chip in it. It's lightning fast. One of the things that makes Apple have that functionality is you can't pick anything on a Mac. The size of your solid state drive, you can't pick your specific solid state drive. You can't pick your specific graphics card. You can't pick a lot of things. And they optimize their OS to run on their hardware. So the M1 chip, blazing fast. I'll tell you right now, it's lightning fast. However, what you're seeing with this new Intel 12th gen processor and Windows 11, and I'll just say this right now, if you have Windows 10 and you have a 12th gen processor, upgrade. So what the new 12th gen processor did is typically Intel, it had 8 cores, they were all the same size. With this new 12th gen processor, they have large cores and then they have small cores. So there's some optimization for your single core applications. It's throwing them up on the large cores that have the higher clock speed. One of the things about Windows 11 is how it allocates instructions. Very similar to what Brad was saying. So with the 12th gen processor, does it need to be on a large core, small core? You know, and that symbiotic between OS and on the hardware, that's starting to happen a little bit more than what we ever saw in Windows 10. Windows 10 didn't really do that. Windows 11 with the new 12th gen Intels, there's a lot of symbiotic, I guess, development between those two. I've had people and I've had friends called me and said, "Oh, you know, I ran Basecamp and virtualized Windows 10 on my M1 chip and ran Revit, and I'm sure it runs great." I, on the other hand, have an overclocked 12900K with a 3090 and DDR4000 RAM, and it's the fastest computer I've ever worked on. I've always wanted to work on the M1 chip with Navisworks and Orvisto and AutoCAD and Revit. They just don't work on that. And virtualizing your AEC applications and hoping for the best with drivers, and
It's not worth it.
to me, with all the pushback we get just for not having certified graphics cards, pitching an M1 chip with virtualization, you probably get one. You could have a great experience if you're an individual, but for a company, I just don't see it being the way.
Yeah.
And I have a Mac as well, just to throw that out there.
Future AMD chips, potentially. We're curious to see, you know, what AMD actually comes out with on their next round of chips, on whether they're going to do the same setup with the big cores and little cores, where you have some hyper-threaded, some non-hyper-threaded. It's really going to depend on them. I haven't really seen anything too much before everybody starts jumping off too much. And we can keep going on some of these questions, but if you guys have questions about hardware and trying to figure out what's actually going to be best for you guys, you can always reach out to me via the email that I shared in the chat, or you can reach out to ATG's website and BIMBOX's website as well, on the contact us page, and we'll make sure that we can get a meeting set up and we can talk with you guys to get everything sorted out for you.
Well, and to throw it out, AMD's made process improvements. The one big difference between AMD and Intel that we typically see is AMD uses what's called multi-die processors. So you have a die here with 8 cores and a die here with 8 cores. That's why their processor is so big. You just keep adding those dies to give you 64 cores, 128 cores, however many. The problem with that is the more cores you have, the hotter it gets, and you can't really overclock it. You have so many different chips and cores, right? Overclocking a 64-core AMD, I went through it. You have to overclock these 4 cores, and then these 4 cores, and then these, and then you get instability. It's a nightmare. Intel uses a monolithic that there's die under that heatsink. So that, as exciting as AMD can just throw 32 cores on a processor, and that's great. Like I said, 90 of the applications in the world only use 1 to 2 cores. So as exciting as it is, also with Windows trying to do that with AMD, I work with the AMD team. They have a group that actually goes out and tries to help optimize code. I know they did it with Leica. I know they did it with some Pharaoh and some other things. When you look at the volume of sales, Intel still makes up probably 80 to 90% of consumer processor sales. And that's why they're the 800-pound gorilla that Microsoft wants to work with. From what we've heard, and I was talking with an AMD rep, went to dinner with them a couple weeks back, they don't have anything that's going to compete with the 12900K for at least a year and a half. I think that's a testament to Intel's jump. And when you say that, it's not like Intel is going to sit on their laurels either. So the 13900K might be coming out, and I know they're kind of developing one. The big difference is what you're seeing is how they share cache, how cores share cache, and how much memory is actually sitting in your chip. I know that might be getting into minutia. So RAM is the fastest thing in the world, but every processor has a small amount of really high speed RAM sitting right there that the cores can use. Sometimes it's in parallel, they can use them to share to do computations together. Sometimes it's just their own cache. They can save something quickly and then bring it back in. So what you're seeing on Intel and AMD, what they're starting to do is stack memory on top of the die, more memory that can stay right there on that processor, so it doesn't have to go out to RAM and come back. That's making big performance gains. I've always said memory is really cool. It's like my favorite thing. I spend about the same thing on my solid state drive as I do on graphics cards. That's me. I love fast memory, and that's, I think it's as can be. So what you're going to see on these processors coming out is increased instructions per clock by having greater memory on that processor.
Yep. Okay, well, thanks guys. Appreciate everybody hopping on and participating in this. I hope it was helpful and insightful to everybody.
Yeah.
If you guys have any more questions or want to do any follow-up or anything, please reach out. You can get to us either via my email, the BIMBOX website, or even ATG's website, and we'll make sure that somebody gets in touch with you and we can make sure we get you taken care of.
That was perfect timing. My dog decided to leave.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good day.